today. We get Graham Stevenson, a leading local trade unionist, past senior official of the Transport and General Workers Union, Unite, and former president of the European Transport Workers Federation. Graham?
Oh, thanks very much, Ian. I came here to talk about the subject of the conference, the impact of Brexit on Birmingham. But I've sat here all day listening to people telling me why we should have a second referendum. I don't quite understand that. And I've actually got some comprehensive and reasonable notes about aviation, automotive, aeronautics, fishing, various industries. Because, I spent 25 years negotiating for my union in Europe, at Brussels, in Strasbourg. So I actually know about these issues. I've actually talked to the Commission about them. I'm not just bullshitting when I say I know what the consequences of the aviation industry might be. I might not know as much as David, I don't know. I did try reading the entire agreement, but I did get bored. So he might be able to catch me out one or two factual things. But I think I've really got this. I think I understand what should have happened, what hasn't happened, and what could happen. And I'm a bit surprised really. I wasn't sure if I was here at the Birmingham meeting of the independent group for a minute. You listen to people who say, Remainers, who say, well, I fully accept the result of the referendum, but, and then there's every reason under the wall for why we shouldn't carry it on. I think the British people have changed their minds. They have changed their minds since the 2017 general election, and they probably do think that Jeremy Corbyn deserves to be Prime Minister, or at least certainly this. Mrs May doesn't deserve to be a Prime Minister. I think that is legitimate, calling for a general election, because all parties are fundamentally divided over the specifics. Now, the specifics of what? Because if I say Brexit, do I mean Mrs May's agreement? Or do I mean the Tory plan? Or do I mean the withdrawal agreement, the actual document? What do I mean when I say this? And it seems to me that it means whatever you want it to say. I didn't know that anti-Semitism was directly related to the withdrawal agreement question. I'm a bit confused about that. But then, me and Jack go back a long way. Yes, he's quite right. We were just a lad when Churchill was still running things. Actually, he didn't tell you this, were competitors in the election for the Deputy General Secretary. I represented the left and he represented the Blairites. Didn't tell you that. Unfortunately, because another left stood at the same time, guess what happened? Jack managed to get that one. But let's go back to the real issues. I think it is untrue to say that there are no significant opinions amongst trade unionists in the European Union or in European countries who are hostile to the European Union, or increasingly more so concerned about the euro in particular. It is true now that there are specific federations. They may not be the DGB, which Fred is probably very familiar with, the German TUC, which is dominant in the European TUC, which gets 80% of its funding from the European Commission directly as a subsidy, as a grant. But it is true that the 50 fishermen's unions in Norway, I am intimately associated with these, I know them. Each port has its own union, and they have a federation, and they all have reasons for not being in the European Union. The main reason is because they're Norwegian, actually. The problem, of course, with the economic area is that it also has its own parallel European Court of Justice, a special court just for the European Union, for its relations with the European Union. And recently, the Dockers Union, there are 20 Dockers unions in Norway, again they have the federation, lost a case relating to labour, posted labour, from an EU country that was going to be paid lower than the dockers rate in the Norwegian, in Norway. So, as you can imagine, lots of Norwegian trade unionists are beginning to wonder even about their rather distant relationship with the European Union. That's a side issue, really, but it does, I think, address the fact that Norway Plus isn't what we're looking for here. What's been going on, of course, is that there's supposed to have been negotiations, but there's also supposed to have been an agreement about an international treaty. But it hasn't been either, actually. What's been has been 2 years of attempting to stop the Tory party imploding whilst trying to make the Labour Party fall apart. That's what's been going on. The mainstream mass media has been rubbing the sores in the Labour Party as heavily as it possibly can to create a sense of disunity and a lack of purpose and a lack of direction. So I think it's unhelpful to now prognosticate. We don't really know what's going to happen. May will either get it through or she won't get it through. I don't think she will. It's looking like it's all going to fall apart, isn't it? There is only one answer. I agree with the comrade who made the point earlier that we have to be calling for an early general election. We need a Labour government. We need a Labour government that's going to pursue a particular course. And I think, as somebody who attempted to negotiate with the European Union for a quarter of a century, now here let me just, I'm not given personally to telling stories about Fred and Bert and Harry and whoever I met, or telling you how wonderful all my successes were. It's not really my style. But I did actually recall the other day that I collected a list of all of the major disputes that I was personally responsible for as an executive officer of the TGWU, and I led 28 strikes and lost not one of them, not a single one. But I won not a single thing at the Commission, at the European Union. Not a single thing. So it's 28 me, nil bosses on the striking front, but it's thousands to nil on the other front. Every time you try to get somewhere with the Commission and you're talking to civil servants appointed by people who are appointed by Council of Ministers, the Council of Ministers is, in any one given thing at any one time, transport, it's the Transport Minister of Britain talking to the Transport Minister of France, Germany, blah, 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 blah. They give these people, these unelected bureaucrats, responsibility of carrying out policies that they daren't do. The British government privatised Britain's railway industry on the basis that there was a train coming down the line from the European Union, a directive that would appear and make us having to deal with this. Actually, the fourth one of these, the fourth package in the railway directive, has only just arrived, but we know what's happened to the British Rail, we know what's happened to Britain's railway industry. The Tory government in Britain was to the fore in promoting anything that they thought was to the advantage of business, their mates. And of course, Tony Blair carried the same policies forward. Carried exactly the same policies. In fact, whilst it might be true that most of the things that we won in this country, in terms of workers' rights, were incorporated, and safety, and I think somebody of you asked about that, and animal rights and quality of life and all the rest of it. Most of these were incorporated. In fact, Britain's position, before there was a common European position on animal rights, was the best in the entire continent. And some pretty deplorable rights in places like Poland and Hungary were forced on them because they had to incorporate Britain's rights. It's true of workers as well. You know, we don't treat sheep being transported particularly now, but it's certainly better than it was the case in Romania before, Poland before it joined the European Union. So these rights were still possible. But as president of the European Transport Workers Federation, I remember dealing with a crisis that hit Europe's transport workers when the Viking case, the Laval case, they've never heard of Jack Droney by the time this is happening, because Tony Blair went to Lisbon in 2000 and forced the Europeans to accept a new treaty, a treaty that says, forget Mrs. Thatcher, we're going to be better than her, what they call liberal policies. The development of privatisation and deregulation as an economic model to compete with America on a global scale was adopted by the European Union 19 years ago. It's a long time. It's a long time since we've seen progressive statements from some politicians. It's a long time since we've seen the European Union sign up to anything that workers could say, yeah, that's pretty good, we'll like that. I dealt with the position when the Secretary for Industry, a man called Peter Mandelson, introduced the European working time directives for the 7 transport industries. I'd spent the previous 15 years trying to negotiate with the European Union a definitive position across the whole of Europe, and it depended what language we were using at the time. Mr. Mandelson said that he was minded to take the most liberal approach to the French version of the directive when it came into Britain, with the end result that there was an inability to stop the exploitation of transport workers of all kinds, and most particularly and most concerning lorry drivers, and also, they're dealing with cabotage regulations, dealt with that. Polish and, plenty of Turkish, by the way, but mostly Polish drivers driving in this country, having spent many days travelling across Europe with the regulations all asunder or minimal. Now, apparently, we shouldn't trust the Tories, but we should trust the bosses, because just in time is a modern way of running things. I'm sure somebody said that here today. Well, just in time is the precise mechanism behind exploiting lorry drivers so that they fall asleep at the wheel and crash. The radio in the morning, they're outside Chester, you're eating your cornflakes, get another pile up. It's because, that's what's happening all the time. If it was an aeroplane, everybody would be onto it, but the level of deaths, the level of injury is sufficiently contained, and it's only Polish truck drivers, so it doesn't matter. No, just in time underpins the role for Britain's car workers that now exists. Once upon a time, we made our own cars, and everything was made here, and then we sold them around the world. Now, we assemble Germany's cars, and some of the local components are made, some of them, but they fit German cars, they don't fit British cars. Actually, there is a British car industry, and it's alive and well. There's at least 12, 14 significant car firms, some of them in the Midlands, that are producing quality cars, Morgan and the like. Many of these have incredibly expanding markets in the USA and in China. Why is there a problem, apparently now, in the automotive industry, but there wasn't 2 years ago, 3 years ago? Well, there are global issues. There's the world harmonised light vehicle regulations. That's carbon dioxide issues to you and me. There's a Volkswagen scandal. You remember that, when they were fiddling things and they said diesel was wonderful and, don't worry about it, it'll be your great-great-grandchildren that die, not in every insect in the world in 12 years. These issues are affecting the car industry globally. They're massive issues. They're not how many hours will I be delayed in Brexit. Some of the smaller car companies have expanded their stock. Do you remember, is anybody here old enough to remember a warehouse in a factory? It used to be every factory had its own warehouse. We don't do that now. What we do is we make others carry the stock. Go to your Asda and sit there in a car and watch all the lorries come every day. All those cornflakes coming in by lorry. That if you stop them, within 5 days, Britain would starve. because everything is geared like that. It's all the market as transnational corporations would wish it. But there's a fundamental political dichotomy in Britain. There are segments of the British capitalist class, even, that aren't in favour of this, that actually want to develop their own business arrangements and are unconcerned with what the problems of international giants are. So it seems to me that we could have been dealing with these issues all this time, but I don't think Mrs May wanted to. I think she wants to be in the European Union. Why? Because the Tory party is dominated by the finance sector, by banking. And most banking, 25-30% of banking in Britain is American owned. So what they want is what Mr Trump wants. And they want to be able to open up a branch of some merchant bank in Prague, if they will, at will. They want to be able to do that. They're not interested in fish. Actually, if we lost the 16% of the fish take that we have from European waters, French, you know, that's this mussel war, you know, let's go and steal the clams off the French, and, you know, if we didn't bother with that, but we told them to stop buggering about in our 200 miles zone that should be erected, then we would not only be able to get back to the level of fish that we were using in 1975, we could exceed it dramatically. It's quite easily done. Why it isn't done is because we have only about 1/10 of the vessels that we used to have. I know a bit about this. I was on one of the EU committees. TNG used to have fishing industry members, which oddly were part of the agricultural policy of the European Union. About 6 families own the vessels that we now have. There's a tiny number of workers in the industry. They're workers by share. They're not paid a wage. They get a share of the cash. It's an exploited industry. Of course, the Tories are not interested in it. They don't. They get it and go to places where the fish is caught to have their fish if they want. They're not interested. What they want to do, and it's been like this from the start, is save banking, is save finance, especially those rather strange aspects of the banking industry the Tory party is quite familiar with. All their mates and all the Tory MPs are into these futures and Paul Bellas and whatever, you know, the weirdest possible kinds of investments that you want. So I think it is possible, it was possible, it's always been possible to find a solution that is in the interests of the working people. And so in a sense, that's the issue. Forget whether you will remain or Brexit or leave or withdraw, whatever you want to call it. Forget that. We're here. This is the position we're in. We don't know what position we're going to be in because of the shenanigans in Parliament, because they're all at it, aren't they? You know, oh well, one MP says, oh well, my constituents voted for Brexit, so I've got to vote for Brexit. Another will say, oh well, all my constituents voted for Brexit, but I'm an independent-minded person, so I'm not going to vote for Brexit. You know, what the hell are they doing? Who is looking at what will satisfy the needs of the fishing industry and the communities around those areas where there used to be tens and tens of thousands of people working? Is it possible for us? I got an Uber to get here because I was running late, and the driver, I tried to explain where we're coming, and he said, oh, is that a science conference then? I thought, oh, no. He said, oh, yeah. And he raised Brexit. I didn't mention it. Well, it's just trade unionists, you know. And he said, well, I was a scientist in India, and we're all here. And he said, I don't understand it. All this talent that we have in this country, and we're not using it. And, you know, that Brexit, that's terrible, he says. You know, wherever I go, I remember when I was in India, and it had made in Britain on it, everybody thought that was the best, that's the poshest car you could get. That's the car to buy, you know, to aspire to. I mean, I was astonished. I said to him, don't you think it's a bit racist? He said, what? He said, it's all these people coming here, taking jobs at lower pay. I don't care whether they're white or brown. That's why people voted for Brexit. That's what it's about. David almost told us that the academics are now catching up with it. Anyone could have told you that. I didn't need to talk to my mate George from 30 years ago. People around me, where I live, they tell me this is what they think. That it's neoliberalism that has been rejected by the British people. And it's neoliberalism that's being rejected inside the labour and the trade union movement. And we need to follow the logic of that as clearly as we possibly can. Now, I've got lots more I could say, as you can tell. I've no idea how long I've talked, but I know that Ian is a very stern chair. But I'm sure lots of you have got different points of view, and maybe you want to put those instead. And there is, I think, you would like to have a general discussion as well.
Okay. Well, thank you, Graham. Can we have 2-3 questions, please, before we move on to the general discussion? Anyone like to raise a question for Graham?
Everybody agree?
Oh, start it first. Okay. No questions for Graham? Oh, right. Okay, in that case then, well, we may as well move on to a general discussion, which we have got about 15 minutes or so for a general discussion. Now, who would like to kick off the general discussion? Come on.
We've all got jail or something.
What aspect of today's conference has bothered you the most? Come on. Where do we go from here? What do we do next? No, there's plenty of themes, options open to us.
Could I just say
okay.
that, sorry, could I just say that I absolutely agree with your point. It's neoliberalism that's the problem and austerity that's the problem, and people wanted a change, and it's like people like projecting all their problems onto the EU. The EU is not perfect at all, but it does feel like it's austerity and neoliberalism, and people's living standards plummeting. And you're right, we don't need, no disrespect to academics and experts and all that, because their work's really valuable, but you just need to listen to the people around you.
Yeah.
You know, people struggling to make ends meet, struggling to make their rents. That's it.
Well, can I take John, then Naeem, then Stuart? John first.
Yes, it's in the context, particularly Graham, you've experienced in Europe. But, I mean, one of the things there seems to be, this question of the elephant in the room, and we're discussing it today, but in Westminster it doesn't exist. There are all sorts of things, the neoliberal model and so on. But the point is, it's been touched on. Other countries across Europe, it's not just Britain, Europeans as a whole, but the whole debate is more or less UK and other European countries. But I certainly get the idea from Greece and the speaker, Kostas Katouvitsis. He knows as a former Greek MP, but also from personal experience, the way that people have been cut out there, and there's a lot of they've talked about loss of the health service, all sorts of things. There's big fires. I mean, they lost the fire service. The fire service were all taken over to the airports to service the airports. They service the people who run the airports, a German firm. Surprise, surprise. So there's this kind of thing which doesn't seem to come up very high about the tensions between different governments in this kind of way. But there is a suggestion that people across Europe are looking to Brexit as a hope. Is there any truth in that, do you think?
I think there seems to be a consensus that part of the reason we are where we are in terms of Brexit is the austerity itself. And I think you are an economist, and I think we can say that austerity is imposed on Birmingham by the national government, by 10 Downing Street. But is there some flexibility that the councils can actually circumvent some of the impact of Brexit? For example, as to what's happening in terms of the care workers, in terms of what's happening with Unite, but also in terms of creating infrastructures. I mean, I think the Birmingham City Council chose to have the Commonwealth Games, they could have chosen to use that money for building the infrastructure that would have helped Jaguar Land Rover in terms of providing electrification, because electrification is a major problem. And I think so that's another aspect of it as well. And I think, I mean, whichever way we look at it, I mean, I think 30 years ago or 40 years ago, when we voted whether to join or not the EU, that was totally different circumstances, right? Today, neoliberalism does not only rule over Europe, it also rules within Britain. So, for example, I mean, when I was 30, 40 years ago, there was Lucas Electrical, Lucas Electronics, and various Lucas Industries. There was British Leyland, there was so many car manufacturers that were primarily British. But I think now they are global, right? There isn't Lucas anymore. So I think whether we go through Brexit or not, neoliberalism would still be ruling Britain. So I think that's some of the things that we need to look at, and I think also what the councils can do in terms of circumventing austerity, whether they have any choices or not. And I think that's what we need to look at.
Okay, Stuart?
Well, you know, as the sister said, I mean, you have to locate this in the context of long-term austerity derived from the 2007-2008 crash and the election of the Tory government in 2010 implementing that massive, I mean, I'm a retired teacher, they've had their pay cut by 15%, but as the brother said here, massive cuts in local government, libraries closing, nurseries closing, all in a very passive way implemented by Labour councils with virtually no resistance, you know. But also I think we need to say that the trade union movement for a time in 2012-2013 organised major strikes, but that they retreated on that and stopped that, you know. Partly I think now the situation is the trade union laws, which require, you know, 50% vote to actually have a strike, you know, which is very difficult for trade unions. And I disagree with what was said about the far right. I mean, I think actually, if Brexit is not delivered, I think that these people are in a bit of a disarray at the moment, but they sense that there is a possibility of, you know, denouncing the treasonous elites for refusing to carry out the democratic wishes of the population. Obviously, I've no reference or relationship with these people, but you could see that they can get some momentum out of that, etc. So I think that that's very important, and I also, you know, Graham's themes of that, you know, you've got to say, you start from what is the interest of working classes, you know, in all these situations, you know, and as other people have said, you know, that we have a situation in Birmingham where the Birmingham Council is using the Tory anti-union laws to implement vicious cuts. I mean, the home care workers are sort of like, now you've got 35 hours, we're just going to reach it to 24 hours, you know. So, you know, despite all the talk of the Labour Party about having minimum wage, living wages, they're supervising a massive cut in that. So I think that the continuation of that austerity being implemented by the representative Labour creates the disillusionment that actually that type of Brexit attitudes in the broader working class. Because I think it's very important to understand it was the broader working class people of the country which actually voted for Brexit and have gotten this thing. So I think you have to have a new direction of policies in the Labour movement, and that one, as many people here had hoped that was going to develop through the Corbyn leadership. I think it's very stuttering at the moment.
Thank you, Stuart. Anyone else want to make a comment, contribution, or a question?
I'll just say, whatever the outcome is, that you have to give people hope. You have to give people hope that they're going to benefit whatever treaty we get. I mean, and again, I do hate these terms when I put that minimum wage. Why can't it be something like £20 an hour?
Yeah.
Why can't you speak like that and give people, ordinary people, the chance to say, you know what, maybe this is going to benefit us this way. It's always people talking down to us. And when you watch the news, it's always the same chattering people who are connected down in London that are just talking to themselves. You never see real people come out, like I say, you sit in the studio and say, hold on a minute, we don't want this anymore. We just want hope. We want to live. We want a job, home, security. We can raise our family, go on the odd holiday, probably have a little drink. That's what this has all got to come down to. So, yeah, that's my view. And strong trade unions as well. Strong trade unions.
Okay. Can we use that as a closing remark?
Yes, you may.
And,
Copyright it, yeah.
Well, you've given a chance to respond, and David had a chance to respond as well.
And the announcement.
Announcements will follow it in this, okay? Dan first, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think I did say that I thought there was a rising scepticism about the direction the European Union is taking and whether or not it has gone so far that it no longer matches the wonderful aspiration that it claimed. I mean, I was with Jack Droning in that hall in the TUC Congress in 1988 when some French bloke got up and started, we didn't even know who he was. Jacques Delors, the commissioner, the Prime Minister, effectively, of the European Federation, suddenly appeared at the TUC and said, "You'll have it all. We'll give you everything you want." What's that? Social charter. I didn't know it existed. Apparently, there's this charter that has no status, of course, in law effect at all. But we were told it was all going to happen. And a week or two later, Ron Todd, who was the General Secretary of the TNG, came along to me and said, "Look, yeah, you're going to be in charge, as I was eventually, of all transport within the Transport General Workers Union. Says, we want you to go to Brussels and sort it out. You're the best bloke for us." Right, they're not going to listen to me. She's the only card game in town. Oh, where'd that come from? Apparently Neil Kinnock told me that. It's the only card game in town. Well, it was rigged. It was a rigged card game. They got all the cards before they gave them out. They knew exactly what they were doing. I used to say there's as many restaurants in Brussels as there are offices of the employers' lobbying organisation. So I was right, 3,000 in each case. 3,000 restaurants, city smaller than this one. Imagine 3,000 restaurants. You could never, ever find a restaurant you had, a cuisine that you could always find a cuisine you'd never eaten. And every single employer organisation in the whole of that union always had a fully staffed office in the centre. Unions thought that that was the way to do it. Eventually, Amicus and the GMB had like one man and a dog in there. It never worked. I tried through the European Transport Workers Federation. We were the most militant, the most effective federation in the entire European Union. We stopped them bringing privatisation and deregulation into ports and docks for 20 years. Admittedly, their third attempt was only stopped because the Barcelona anarchists brought rockets and pulled them and sent them into the European Commission offices. And it went very quiet for about 5 years. But I hear they got it through last year, albeit a much muted version of it. Opening the market, it's called, not privatisation. Removing red tape, it's called, not deregulation. But they've done that in every industry they could get away with. Now, it's inconceivable that European citizens in some countries, particularly the southern countries, would still be satisfied with, you remember Franco was in charge when we went into the European Union. Look at it now. Yeah, gone. Haven't social democratic parties in most of Europe collapsed? So this notion that they're all in favour of it, I don't think it's true, There is, I think the problem is, although people know austerity's not right, privatisations, they don't quite know what the answer is. And of course, different governments play it differently. I said earlier that both Tory and Labour governments, new Labour governments, in this country, in our membership of the European Union, have played it, have used it to do whatever it is that business wanted. And whatever unions wanted, they never got. I remember when Tony Blair was elected Prime Minister, I said to Bill Morris, so what do you think he's going to give us, Bill? He said, well, not very much at all. might get 2 things out of this. Well, what about anti-union laws? He said, "We'd be joking." He was right. Lord Boris still remembers Tony with some fondness. Look at what happened over ship manufacturing recently in this country. The UK government is willing to allow 2 important manufacturers, one in Liverpool, one on the south coast, to go to the wall. You know what Tony Blair lookalike number 2 is, and France is doing, the president? He nationalised a military shipbuilding firm to stop it from being sold off, and he's going to sell it back to the private sector once it's got going. So he saved it, right? So it is true that the European Union doesn't formally force you to privatise, doesn't formally stop you from developing public ownership, but it doesn't encourage it. And if you show any hesitancy or any, please tell me I've got this wrong, they'll say, yeah, you got it wrong. What you have to do is to fight them. Now that's quite a fight. Fortunately, the British people have handed us on a plate with a simple way of dealing with this. All we've got to do is say, no thanks. Now, because most of what Germany sells in the car industry to us is balanced by mostly what we sell them in value, anybody, any negotiator in their right mind should have been able to have resolved this already. We won't buy you if you don't buy us. Can we do a deal? It's not out with the WTO rules. Even if it were within the WTO rules, all this talk is about customs and checking. It's WTO rules and the tariff that's important. Adds 5 to 10% on a car according to whether it's a part, what parts are involved. 10% actually on German cars coming into this country would be quite handy. It would mean that British cars are cheaper. Oh, true. Selling British cars to France might not be too good, but hang on. Most British cars are sold to Germany, sold to America, India and China. I negotiate. I've spent my life negotiating. I don't understand why it can't be possible to go to the largest dispenser of services, not finance services, in the European Union, France, which owns most of our bus companies, well, those that aren't owned by the Germans, and say, we won't stop you from buying bridges and infrastructure, which they're really into. That's the big thing. Actually, it's the French National Bank's investment arm, so they're actually nationalised. Most British bus companies are nationalised. Did you realise that? They're just not nationalised by Britain.
They're nationalised by Germany and France.
They're nationalised and Spain as well, and others. You know, it's a nonsense. Well, I think they would do a deal, but they weren't faced with that. What they need to be faced with is a very firm British government that says we want something for the needs of the ordinary people and we'll demand you do this. The final word, I'm just going to wrap up now, is in a lot of these sectors, apart from energy, where we're tied up dramatically, because it all started with coal and steel, didn't it? And then they got wound it down in 2005. Most people have never heard of it, but there's this special market that exists that we can't quite get out of in the selling of energy, which stops us from, by the way, from making public ownership. So that's one thing that does. But it does that by this rather strange device that it's the British regulator that will decide whether we can do that or not, and they have to be governed by the precedents of the European Court of Justice. So it won't be the ECJ that decides, it'll be a British regulator who'll decide whether or not French-owned energy firms, because that's what they are, aren't they? They're not British-owned. Will be able to take control of them. But in the case of aviation and aeronautics, particularly aeronautics manufacture, and even in cars, most type approval, most regulations about the nature of the thing that's being made are global. They're not European at all. It's a global market. It's not a European market. It is perfectly possible that Britain actually holds the current brief for determining car approval type in Europe. It has to give it up unless the EU agrees it. If I was a negotiator, I'd be saying, hey, we're going to keep that. What's your price? What do you want for it? How much are we going to get for it? It was possible, it is possible, but both parties have had backbench MPs fighting like blue murder for the last 2 years to prevent any sensible discussion about these things that might be in the interest of ordinary people.
Okay. Thank you, Graham. David, would you like to add a few comments?
I think it would be difficult to follow such fire and brimstone, so I'll keep quiet.
Okay, well, Sam, you're not, would you like to take the opportunity to add a further or final comment?
I think I've said what I need to say. I mean, thank you very much for having me, and
Okay.
thank you for all your questions. It's been interesting. So.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thanking the speakers. I know some of them had to leave early, but obviously David Hearn and James Stevenson had excellent contributions today. Unfortunately, we're coming almost to the end of the conference.
Oh.
Sadly, but there are further conferences planned throughout the year.
All on Brexit.
Not quite Brexit, but related issues and related matters.